Hi, Adrian. So good to see you again. Thank you so much for coming.
It's a pleasure, Tarun, to see you again. I look forward to this.
Sure. Could you start with telling us a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind?
Absolutely. My background is I played professional ice hockey for over 20 years. It was my childhood dream to do that growing up in Montreal. Ice hockey is a religion there. So I was quickly exposed to that. And I spend most of my time on the outdoor rinks. I really took a love and became very passionate, invested most of my time in hockey. So it was a thing that really kept me focused. I had a goal and a dream and a vision early on. And all of a sudden, step by step, I started getting better and better. And I think by the age of 14, they started saying you should consider uh, that you might have the tools and the skills to play at the highest level. It's always nice to hear that. But I found myself at 18 being a professional, and at 19, I was on Hockey Night in Canada. My family, friends watching me coast to coast in Canada, we say across the country, the thing that I grew up watching. So the thing that I really loved and I did most of my childhood became the thing that I was doing in life. So that's what I did for 20 years. And then at the age of 42 approximately, I retired and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I did a little bit of coaching in ice hockey, which I still do now, but my main thing now is really working on being a transformational, a mindset coach. So I help athletes, and not only athletes, but I had help individuals around the mindset and also being able to enjoy the journey because I think the process is so important. Something that I struggled with. That's why I fell into that because I most of my career struggled with anxiety and I felt that I couldn't access my full potential. I couldn't have the experience that I imagined myself having. Well, there was things that were getting in the way, barriers, blocks, limitations. And that sort of put me on this journey is like I wanted to know how I was getting in my own way and how people get in their own way and what makes a difference between someone, who's, well, two guys who are equally skilled and one just continuously grows and, is able to access his potential and even more in someone who underachieves. And so I think there are, you start noticing those things that get in the way and usually it's a form of self-sabotage. So we're creating the condition whether, we're going to grow and we're going to play or live into our potential or we're going to get stuck and not grow. And this is a real interest to me.
Okay. You bring up a lot of interesting points. And as you were speaking, I realized I think it is time for us to move from saying two players are equally skilled to saying two players are equally skilled physically. Because until now, the body is what people are focused on mostly. Now it is time to start splitting the body and the mind and working on both of them independently. So you can say both of them are equally skilled physically. What about mentally? And there you can start to see that there's a completely different component where somebody could be this, like a 80 on 100, whereas the other person could be 15 on 100. And that's the area that needs work. So let me segue into that. You recently went through the Contemplate sports mental fitness program and also the core program. As a former NHL player, what are your thoughts on this program?
What I love about it is the depth, especially with the core program, really understanding principles that when I was 20, I wish I would have known. Because the reality is, we all have blind spots where we're conditioned, from a young age. And we get conditioned in the way where we sort of develop all these coping mechanisms in life. And so we basically start to cope in life. And what I didn't realize when I was 20 years old is like what was driving me, what was motivating me. And there was a lot of fear and insecurity and stress. But because that's where I operated from, it felt familiar. So what I love about Contemplate and why I think it's so great is, well, it starts by learning these principles and being exposed to them. You start asking yourself deeper questions. You're actually contemplating within you is like, well, what's driving me? Is it fear? Or, is it that I want to create and I want to go out there and experience? And the reality is, as kids, we were all in self-expression. But then over time, we develop, like I said, we start operating from these limiting beliefs that we carry. And you can say the byproduct is, well, what is principle one? It's twin voices. So we have a voice within us, which is really our genuine voice. I call our true self. And then we have a voice in us is like, oh, the voice that is judging or being critical, not discerning, but judgment, and always feeling like you're not enough or needing to prove, the urge to prove, which is another principle. So you start seeing that there's duality within a person. And in this duality, if you don't sort of recognize and you're reacting from these parts of you that are conditioned and programmed, and that's where you're putting your energy, I would compare it to the good and the bad wolf. So it's known that we need 3 to 5 positive things to simply equal, to create a neutral foundation. So you need 3 to 5 positive against 1 negative. So because of survival mechanisms, this goes very back, we tend to remember and be more influenced by the negative. So if you're not aware of these things, you might get stuck, in the negative. And we're carrying some beliefs. And what I love about Contemplate is that it exposes, it starts like it forces you to contemplate, to look within yourself and see, okay, where could I have a blind spot that could be preventing me from accessing more of my potential? Ultimately, I think the program is really about cultivating peace and clarity, or peace of mind and clarity. And that for me feels like, if you imagined you're on the ocean, and when the water or the lake, the water is still, like you can see everything, there's just a feeling, everything is sort of, it feels harmonious. And then when all of a sudden the waters get choppy, and then you see nothing, it's just like it feels a whole lot different. Well, this is what happens in our minds. And a lot of us experience stress, a lot of us experience doubt, self-doubt, all these um, where the mind is overthinking and overactive. And contemplate really allows you to get back to, you know, I feel which is the essence of who you are. Uh, so there's a ton of wisdom there, and it's very it's practical. There's exercises, and it's done in a systematic way where, just like I'm going to the gym, as a hockey player, I start the season and I start working on my body and my legs, and then as the season goes on, it's done in a way where you're going deeper, deeper, and the result is that you're trying to create within yourself, within your mind, you're creating that space of where there's peace, where there's clarity of mind. So the body and the mind are connected. So the more peace, the more clarity you have, the more you'll be able to the body, the mind will not get in the way of what the body does. And I know how I blocked myself, and where my anxiety came from. It came from overthinking, from having all these thoughts that I couldn't even see because I was so in it. I was, so consumed by it, and I was so identified. So I believe the first step is really becoming self-aware. And that's what contemplate, starts is it teaches you principles to become more self-aware.
Okay. You mentioned some instances when you, as a hockey player, faced a few things. Could you elaborate on that, and how do you see the Contemplate Sports module being relevant to an athlete in that regard?
So I'll give you just a little example that I had. So I um, was playing in front of 20,000 people at the age of 19. So I remember one specific game. I had tried a pass up the middle, it got picked off. They went down and scored. And then I was you know, on TV, being interviewed in the newspaper. As a 19-year-old, this is like overwhelming, like your name's everywhere. But it's attached to, one of the reasons why we lost, So no one gave me a manual how to deal with that. No one gave me a manual to, like, how do you deal with the pressure of of these moments when things don't go well, when you're not on top of your game, when you're out of flow, when there's 20,000 people, or there's fans that are booing your team, or maybe even heckling you. So I think the sports module really touches upon, some of these things. How do you deal with, pressure in pro sports? And the main aspect, I think, of Contemplate is that the human being comes first, and then the athlete comes second. And that resonates because I'm a big believer of having a holistic approach to sports. If you're really good in your own skin, you feel good in your own skin, and you're working on that day in, day out, just like you're working on your body, you're reminding yourself, like you're just awareness is something you grow, something you develop. The more you grow, the more your mind will become aware of things that are important. when I was, playing at 20, I was more aware of not the important things. So I would have a very myopic picture of everything. And so I was so disturbed, and I was also how do you say, very distracted. There's so many distraction in pro sports. All of a sudden now you're famous, so there's everybody trying, to get a piece of you and all these things. And if you're not, like that human being part, if you're not grounded in who you are, your energy will be pulled in every direction. And that's often what I felt like. Okay, yeah, sometimes the intention was nice, but that's not where I needed to have my focus. That was more of a distraction, if that makes sense. So what I love about the sports module is there's actual exercises, like the focus dot, and being able to train your mind to bring your attention back to the moment. I think that is ultimately the greatest skill that you can develop as an athlete, because your mind will tend to go, oh, I remember when I played, and I'll give you a great example in Zurich in the championship game. Zurich had not won in 39 years, and it was game 6 at home. And imagine 15,000 people in Zurich waiting for us to win after 39 years of like having this dry spell. And imagine like the weight and all the expectations in the newspaper. And I was an import, so I was a main key player in on the team. And I remember the game just went 1-1, 2-1, 2-2, 3-2, and then 3-3. And the whole game, I was super anxious. I couldn't let go. Usually, often you're able to let go of like the anxiety, the nervousness, but there was so much riding. So all my beliefs, all my beliefs, all my everything, the fears would surface. And I remember just telling myself, um, you have to make a difference. I had a mantra. I didn't want my mind to go to what if scenarios. And what ended up happening, 10 seconds left in the game, there was a turnover. They turned the puck over. I walked into an area that was wide open, and my teammate passed the puck to me, and I shot. I just shot, and I scored the winning goal, the championship winning goal with 10 seconds to left. So imagine all the weight that dropped off my shoulder. But I'm using the example that I wish that I could have enjoyed that process much more. I was living that moment in survival because I didn't train the mind enough. I didn't, have these exercises, because when I played, we didn't really talk about, it was more of the physical, and like, well, if your mind's like that, your default setting, if you don't train it, you're going to fall back into your default setting. So they call like the thermostat, whatever the temperature, of the room, of the comfortable. And we all have different makeups, some is some the mental aspect, they have to work at it much harder. They might have the physical attributes, but the mental aspect they really need to put focus on. So I think this to me just I I think today is really a time where this should be something that you do side by side with, the physical. It should be part of our training, because you're limiting someone's potential if you're not working, those aspects of the minds, which will, in key moments, how much freedom you have within you, within your mind, your ability to focus, your ability to bring your attention where you need it, that ultimately will allow you to perform at your best.
You're a coach now, and You see young athletes working on their game, and we know that only a handful really will go pro, but there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people who will play the sport. What are your thoughts on those people as they go through this journey? What do you see? What are they dealing with? And how could, for example, comparing themselves or not listening to themselves, what do you see today for the athletes who don't go pro and probably will never go pro, but they'll still play the sport?
Well, what I see is I believe sports is, the beautiful thing about sports is you get a direct feedback. You know, often you do certain things and the feedback's not immediate, but in sports, when you play a stronger team, a weaker team, you might win, 4-1, but then you walk in and you think you're really good. And then you play a team and you get blown out 6-0. So that's a direct feedback. And I think sports really exposes what you're strong at and what you're weak at. So I would tell, all these, aspiring, maybe some are aspiring, and I know some are not, use sports uh, as a tool for your growth. Because I know as well in business, the things that we learn in sports, how to handle pressure, there's so much going on, and your ability to use your body, and be free, because ultimately what you have to go do is, I mean, for ice hockey is you have to pass the puck, you have to shoot the puck, for soccer, it's kick. So it's being able, to allow the body to do its thing. What do you say? The motor system, the motors, like allowing your body to, to perform. And I think I would tell these young kids is often they're so focused on the result or trying to be pro that they're they get hijacked. They go into like highs and lows, and they don't experience the journey. They're just thinking about the final result, hoping. And so there's an immense pressure that they put on themselves, which I think is not necessary. Because ultimately there's a saying, it says that if you're good, if you get to a level of mastery, they will find you. You'll be found, no matter where you are. So, like, focus on the self mastery, focus on the growth, focus on getting better and better. And I think that's what I would tell them. It's like use sports as a way to build your character, to get to know yourself, and use it as a way to grow. So whatever happens, you're going to have these tools that you're going to be able to move through life that are going to be an asset for you moving forward.
It's a great one. Thank you. One last question, maybe. How do you see the Contemplate sports mental fitness system helping the coaches so that they can help the athletes better? What are your thoughts on that?
The way I see that, and maybe, well, I've been in both seats. The player is experiencing one thing, and if you weren't, as a coach, if you weren't a player, you're sort of missing that piece of the puzzle. So you're not completely understanding, what is, what is a player going through. And everybody's different. We don't see, we see the skills, we see the mistakes as coaches, we see all this, but we don't know what is that, what's the experience that that player is having internally. And I think as you go through the module, going through the sports part for the player as the coach would be, I think, really recommended. And I believe you recommend that to coaches to do the everything. So you're able, to put yourself in the player's shoes, in your player's shoes, and ultimately, the question is as a coach, like what is needed, for your players, for your team to perform the best. And I think that the sports module would really touches, so many points, so many amazing, like important points of like how is someone experiencing the pressure, so having the big picture, seeing the big picture, because often coaches, if they're so consumed in their own ego and just like winning and losing, like they're just gonna relate to the player as like a number, you know, and then the player becomes a number and there's no trust, there's no relationship that's being established. And I think this would really open the door for coaches to be much more empathetic. In sports, you have to be direct and lead, but there's a time to, you know, to where some love is needed, some caring, some empathy. So I think having, I think coaches would raise their level of emotional intelligence just doing that, doing the sports module, and just have a better picture of what's going on. And so when you have a better picture, you're able to influence in bigger ways. You're able to understand, and it's not always just about pushing. Sometimes that's not what is needed. So it will give an overall better picture to coaches, and I think, um, yeah, ultimately they will win. And coaches as well are growing too. They're growing. They're just in a different role. They're responsible for, in ice hockey, 20-25 players. So that's the difference between a player. You're more responsible just for your game. You're also, I think, responsible. They'll be creating connection in that team spirit, but ultimately the coach is the leader, and he has to create this environment where everybody feels included. I think that's so important.
And if you, back in the day, if as a player, your team and other teams, if they had coaches who had something like this as a framework, because of course coaches genuinely worry about the athlete, they genuinely want to help, but perhaps they don't have a system. So they just do the best they can. Do you think it would have helped to have a systematic method for training the mind as you also train the body for the sport, for the coach?
Definitely. Um, I mean, as a coach, most coaches are already, one of the skills that's required is being really organized, and so there's a lot of systems from the standpoint of ice hockey. You have five players, playing at the same time on the ice. So knowing every one or the individual roles of each player. The goalie is obvious, separate. His role is to stop pucks. But I think just that the coach doesn't have to worry if they would have this, this systematic method where the mind is, being treated. They know that their players have that support. so they can really, sort of, bring up these parts because often this is not really talked about. And they can go into a specific, theme because everybody is being exposed and learning the same things. So I think that would be a huge advantage is that, just like you're training when you go into training camp, you're training fitness, your first few weeks. Well, maybe you would train something for the mind in, you know, uh, um, in tandem with the physical. So I definitely think having a systematic approach, a method could be something that, teams could like apply throughout the season, work on specific things depending on the strengths and the weaknesses, of the team. And I think ultimately the best teams are the most resilient, you know, are those teams who, when challenges will happen, there's out of the challenge, out of the struggle, some strength is developed, is cultivated. And so I think Contemplate, the sports module, can definitely help with that because then it becomes a topic of conversation. It's no longer like, something we don't talk about. It's there, it's in the environment. And I think, yeah, I would definitely, um, uh, I think when coaches would see how powerful this is, they would sort of initiate, because that's the aspect of helping someone reach their potential is like, oh, you're trying to create the conditions within a player. So we talked about peace of mind, clarity, that someone can go out and play and they're free, they're not no longer worrying about themselves. So when you're no longer the problem, well, you can just go out and perform. And that ultimately, I think, is what all athletes are looking for. And even coaches, I'll give you a great example, and maybe we're going a little bit long, is the Florida Panthers. Paul Maurice is their coach, and he's one of the longest, yeah, his tenure in the NHL is like, I don't know, over 20 years. He's been there for long. And what he said, in when they won the cup, he goes, he said something about, being in the moment. Often as teams, like we're ahead and we want the game to finish. He goes, we want time to slow down because when we're in our element, we want to savor it. And that's flow state, you know, that's contemplate. I think ultimately the peace of mind, the clarity, it's part of being in flow. And he says, when we're in flow, we know we're going to perform at our best. So we're not worried about the result. And they were Stanley Cup champions. Florida Panthers became first time Stanley Cup champions last year. And so imagine a coach like just, hands off. I'm trusting my players. We're slowing, we're slowing time down. We're savoring the game. It's so counterintuitive to what we're taught because, everything's always been high stress in sports. It's like, but I think this is, there's coaches who now are much more aware and have a real high emotional intelligence and are changing the environment within a locker room and within a group. So that's exciting.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm envisioning a future where, in addition to the existing coach, you will now also have a contemplate mental fitness coach outside of the field or the court or whatever that sport is, where hundreds of hours of mental fitness training would have gone into that athlete before that athlete actually gets onto the field or the court. And that, I believe, would be a completely different game altogether. That's what I hope for as well. Thank you so much, Adrian, for your time. It was lovely speaking to you. And I think I'd love to speak to you again on a couple of more topics. Let's get together sometime and see. You have a wealth of experience with your career and now with your coaching. I'm sure we can pull out a lot of tidbits of wisdom. So I'd like to do that sometime.
I would love that. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.